Well, hello again. It's been about a little over a week since I did a video, but uh, I was thinking about some things, and we're living in some crazy times, and just thinking about some things that Paul wrote. In fact, we're going to read some stuff that Paul wrote in 68 AD, and so we have to ask ourselves the question: are we seeing some of these things today? Now, these things have always been in existence. They've always operated in the world. But I think as Paul was writing here, and we're going to look at 2 Timothy chapter 3 in verses 1 through 5. But I think what Paul was relating is in the last days that you're not only going to see these things because they've always been in existence, but they're going to be an intensifying of these things. And so we're going to just look at some of these things, read some of these things, and just asking you the question, where are we at? Are you seeing some of these things in the world that you're living in or in your area? And then there's a phrase that we're going to read in verse 5, and we'll stop there. But the next time that we come back and do a video, I want to talk about that phrase. But let me read to you real quickly 2 Timothy chapter 3 in verses 1 through 5. And it says this. He says, this know, so we need to know these things. Know, he says, this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. And he says, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents. They'll be unthankful, they'll be unholy, they'll be without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, can't say that word, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. In verse 5 it says this, it says, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. And so just going through that real quickly, as Paul is relating, as I said, he wrote this about 68 AD, they're saying. And so here we are in 2020. These things have always been in existence, always been going on in the world. But I'm asking you, are we seeing an intensifying of these things today? Because Paul here says in the last days, and I don't know about you, I don't know what your theology is, but I believe we're living in the last days, and I believe the imminent return of Jesus Christ could, or if you want to, I call it the rapture of the church. That's what I believe in. Could happen any moment at any time. But as Paul said there, perilous times, that word perilous, and it can be translated whatever version you're using. I use several versions. I read out of the King James, but I use several versions. But it just simply means dangerous, difficult, hard, or grievous. That same Greek word that Paul uses for perilous times is found only one other place, and it's found in Matthew chapter 8 and verse 28, where Jesus meets the two demon-possessed in the Gergesenes as he comes out of Matthew chapter 28, that they were demon-possessed. And the word there in the King James, it says they were exceeding fierce. In other words, this means that these men were wild, they were vicious, they were uncontrollable, they were unpredictable, they were dangerous. And so that's the kind of times that Paul is describing here. And so I'm asking, I think we're maybe living in those times. One commentary that I looked into about this called it social degeneration. And so we're just seeing the society come apart, as it will. And so here are 18 traits that have always existed, but now maybe we're seeing them intensifying in the last days. And so here we are. It says, lovers of their own selves, as Paul begins to list 18 traits, and I'm going to go through them quickly because I don't want to make a long video. It says, the lovers of own selves. That means people are self-centered or narcissistic or selfish. I was looking up different things and different commentaries of these words. The word covetous simply means lovers of money or fond of money. Reminds you of 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verses 9 and 10. And you can look those up. Then we find here, as the King James calls it, boasters, or people that are braggarts, or that says, the one thing that I looked up, it says, full of empty big words of things they love to accomplish. Are we seeing that in the day that we're living? Proud, that means arrogant, self-esteem. They walk around around like they're important and people are important. Blasphemers, that just simply means railing accusation is what one commentary or one help that I looked up, or one word definition. It was railing accusations that speak evil in reference not only to God, it wasn't almost really reflecting on God, but speak evil in reference to their fellow man rather than God. One of the commentaries said, disobedient to parents. Well, that goes without saying. And I think we're seeing that in the day that we're living, that people are rebelling, that have never been really told no, never been really told how to obey rules. And so disobedient to parents is one of the things that Paul says we'll see an intensifying of these things. Unthankful, that is ungrateful. And there again, we're living, I think, in that generation, or at least the society that we're seeing, the you owe me something generation. And so I'm just asking the question. Paul wrote this in 68 AD. Here we are in 2020. Are we seeing these things intensify? I think we are. Then it says, unholy. And this just simply implies that people who reject sacred obligations, and there's nothing holy to the people that they're out in the world that we're living in today. There's nothing holy, and without natural affection. And you read that. I read that in the King James, and it says, well, that goes without saying. You kind of know what we're talking about. But really, the Greek connotation and how that was phrased in a lot of the helps that I looked at is just simply this. It means unloving or heartless toward mankind. And I think you'll find a lot of your more modern English translations that are maybe up to date in the language that we're accustomed to really refer to it that way. In fact, I was going to the New Living just simply means, oh gosh, if I could find it. They will betray their friends, and those or unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self-control. They will be cruel and hate what is good. And the New Living talks about some of those things. And so without natural affection may not mean exactly what we think it means when you read the King James. It just simply means unloving or heartless toward mankind. And then we have truce breakers, or people that are irreconcilable. They'll not agree to anything. We have false accusers that are slanderers. And I mean, you got to just turn on the news and you see people slandering so-and-so, and it's just a constant, and you see that. Incontinent, that just simply means people without self-control. Now this means for bodily lust, and you have to ask yourself, are you seeing an intensifying of that in the world that you're living in? Fierce just simply means savage, or brutal, or untamed. If you're like me, you watched a lot of things on television of riots, and seen maybe a lot of things on Facebook or whatever social media that you use, and you're seeing a lot of people that are brutal or savage. Despisers of those that are good. That means unfriendly to people who do good. One of the helps that I used, unfriendly to people who do good. It's amazing. Nobody wants to do good to anybody or wants to be friendly to anybody. Are you seeing that intensify in the world you're living in? And then you simply got traitors. That means they're treacherous in their dealings with people. People are always trying to one-up somebody or stab somebody in the back and those kind of things. You can't trust anybody anymore. Heady, that means headstrong, rash, or reckless. I think we're seeing a lot of that on our evening news. High-minded, people puffed up with pride. It doesn't take you very long to see people like that. And then it says this, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. That just simply means sensual gratification is their God. And they don't walk by faith, but they walk by what feels good or what pleases them. And then Paul says this in verse 5, and we're going to finish up here, but it says in verse 5, it says this, Paul says, they have a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. I like how the Amplified says it this way. It says, although they have denied, they holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. In other words, they've denied their conduct. Their conduct nullifies their claim of faith. Oh, you know, I'm sad to say I think the church is full of a lot of people like that. The New Living says this: they will act religious, but they will reject the power that can make them godly. And here's the phrase that I want to come back next time with just looking at this. So as we see these things, as Paul's writing to believers here, he's writing to Timothy and telling Timothy, he says that phrase, he says, from such, these people he just listed, 18 traits that you're going to see in the last days intensify. From such, turn away. What does that mean for you and I as believers? From such, turn away. Are we supposed to abandon mankind? And the Amplified says this. He says, avoid such people and keep far away from them. The New Living says this, stay away from people like that. Now, what does Paul mean when he says that? From such, turn away, or stay away from people like that, or to keep away from them, keep far away from them. The Amplified says, what are you and I as believers to do as we see these things intensifying? Are we just supposed to turn our back on mankind and not present the gospel? Because Paul says here, from such turn away, keep far away from them, avoid them at whatever cost. Well, next time I want to maybe delve into that phrase and maybe help us as believers of what we are to do and how we are to conduct ourselves in these last days as we see these 18 things here that Paul, and I don't think this is an exhaustive list, that Paul lists these 18 things that have been in the world while Paul was in the world, but he said in the last days, there'll come perilous times, hard times, difficult times, grievous times, exceeding fierce times. He says, we're going to see all these traits, and from such turn away. What responsibility do you and I as believers have in these last days? And I want to cover that in our next time, in our next video. Thank you for watching, if you're watching, and the Lord bless you. Amen.